The smell hit Werner Hoffman before the seasickness did. 400 men packed into a cargo hold designed for machinery, breathing the same recycled air for 6 days straight. Sweat, vomit, fear. The stench had layers, each one telling its own story of defeat. Werner was 17 years old. 3 weeks ago, he had been a soldier. 11 days before his capture, he had been a student in Hamburg, memorizing Latin verbs and dreaming about university. Now he sat with his back against a rusted bulkhead, knees pulled to his chest, watching shadows move in the dim emergency lighting. The USS General Anderson cut through Atlantic swells with mechanical indifference. Above deck, American sailors went about their duties. Below deck, German prisoners waited for whatever came next. Werner had stopped counting the hours. Time moved differently in the hold. Men slept when exhaustion overcame them and woke when nightmares refused to let them rest. Some prisoners played cards with scraps of paper. Others stared at nothing, their minds still trapped in the hedgerows of Normandy where Allied artillery had torn their units apart. A hand grabbed Werner's shoulder. He flinched before recognizing Friedrich, the medic who had been captured alongside him. Friedrich was 24, ancient by the standards of their unit. He had gray at his temples and steady hands that had stitched wounds on both German and American soldiers before the military police dragged him away. "You need to eat something," Friedrich said, pressing a hard biscuit into Werner's palm. "The Americans gave us rations this morning. You slept through distribution." Werner looked at the biscuit. His stomach churned at the thought of food, but he forced himself to take a bite. The texture was sawdust. The taste was survival. "Where are they taking us?" Werner asked. He had asked this question before. No one ever answered. Friedrich settled beside him. "America. That much is certain. Beyond that, only God and Roosevelt know." From across the hold, a voice cut through the murmur of prisoners. "God has abandoned Germany. Do not speak of him here." Werner recognized the speaker. Sergeant Klaus Brenner, Africa Corps veteran, holder of the Iron Cross Second Class. Brenner had fought under Rommel in the desert before being transferred to France just in time for the Allied invasion. He carried himself like a man who had never known defeat, even though defeat was all around them. Brenner approached Werner and Friedrich with measured steps. Other prisoners moved aside, creating a path through the cramped space. Brenner had established himself as the senior German NCO in the hold. No one challenged him. "I have been watching you," Brenner said, his eyes fixed on Werner. "You cry at night. The whole hold hears it." Heat rushed to Werner's face. He wanted to deny it, but what was the point? The darkness revealed everything. "He is a boy," Friedrich said quietly. "He should be in school, not in war." Brenner's expression hardened. "He wears the uniform. He carries the responsibility. The Americans will see his weakness and exploit it. They will use soft ones like him for propaganda." He leaned closer to Werner. "Whatever happens when we arrive, remember who you are. Remember what you fight for." Werner wanted to ask what exactly he was fighting for now. Germany felt like a distant memory, a place that existed only in photographs and propaganda films. But he kept silent. Brenner was not a man who welcomed questions. On the sixth night, everything changed. Werner felt it before he heard it, a shift in the ship's vibration, a change in the engine's rhythm. Men stirred throughout the hold. Whispers spread like fire through dry grass. Someone near the single porthole gasped. Werner pushed through the crowd. His small frame allowed him to squeeze between larger men until he reached the porthole. He pressed his face against the salt-crusted glass, and there was light. Not the dim glow of a blacked-out city or the distant flicker of burning buildings. Real light. Thousands of points of brightness stretching along a coastline that seemed to go on forever. Skyscrapers rose against the night sky, their windows blazing. Streets formed rivers of illumination. Signs flashed colors Werner had forgotten existed. This was America. This was the country Germany had promised was starving, collapsing, weak. This was the nation that supposedly trembled before the might of the Reich, that Werner's hands shook against the porthole frame. Everything they told him was at T dawn. Guards ordered prisoners on a deck. Werner climbed the ladder on trembling legs, his eyes struggling to adjust to actual sunlight after nearly a week in darkness. The air tasted different, clean, salted, impossibly fresh. New York Harbor spread before him like a painting. Ships dotted the water. Cranes swung along distant docks. And rising from the morning fog, green copper catching the first rays of sun, stood the Statue of Liberty. Some prisoners turned away. Others stood frozen. Werner heard a man behind him begin to weep. Friedrich appeared at Werner's side. His face was pale but calm. "Welcome," Friedrich said softly, "to the country we were supposed to destroy." Brenner pushed past them both, his jaw clenched, his eyes refusing to look at the statue. But Werner could not look away. Something had cracked inside him, something that would never fully heal. The war was over for him. He just did not know yet what would take its place. The first American to touch Werner was a doctor with gentle hands and tired eyes. Werner stood in a line of prisoners stretching across the processing yard at Camp Shanks, New York. The September sun beat down on concrete, still warm from summer. Guards with rifles watched from elevated platforms, but they looked bored rather than hostile. None of them shouted. None of them struck anyone. This alone felt like a violation of everything Werner had been taught to expect. "Next," called a clerk at a wooden table. Werner stepped forward. A sergeant handed him a brown paper bag without meeting his eyes. Werner looked inside. A sandwich wrapped in wax paper. An apple so red it seemed artificial. A chocolate bar in silver foil. A small carton of milk. He stared at these items as though they were artifacts from another civilization. Chocolate. Werner had not seen chocolate in 2 years. In Germany, such luxuries had vanished long before the Allied bombs started falling. Children traded ration cards for scraps of bread. Families stretched single meals across entire days. And here, in enemy hands, he held more food than his mother had seen in a month that he did not eat. He cannot. His throat closed around a knot of confusion that no amount of swallowing could clear. Medical examinations came next. Prisoners filed into a converted warehouse where American doctors conducted assessments with clinical efficiency. Werner removed his tattered uniform and stood shivering in the autumn air, suddenly aware of how thin he had become. His ribs showed like piano keys beneath stretched skin. The doctor examining him was perhaps 50, with silver hair and spectacles that reflected the overhead lights. He spoke no German, but his hands communicated clearly enough. "Turn. Cough. Breathe deeply." He pressed a stethoscope to Werner's chest and frowned at whatever he heard there. Then the doctor's fingers found the bruises on Werner's ribs. Yellowed now, fading but still visible. The doctor paused. His eyes met Werner's. Werner looked away. Those bruises had not come from combat. They had come from Sergeant Mahler during training in Hamburg, when Werner had failed to assemble his rifle quickly enough. Mahler believed in education through pain. The Wehrmacht called it building character. The doctor wrote something in his file. Werner never learned what. Back in the processing yard, Werner found Friedrich sitting against a fence, eating his sandwich with the careful deliberation of a man who understood hunger. Brenner stood nearby with a group of Afrika Korps veterans, their food untouched on the ground. "Poison," Brenner announced loudly enough for nearby Americans to hear. "They want to weaken us before interrogation." A true German would rather starve than accept enemy charity. Werner watched the discarded sandwiches. His stomach screamed. Around him, younger prisoners hesitated, caught between hunger and loyalty. Then something unexpected happened that a black American soldier approached carrying a crate of blankets. He moved with quiet authority, his uniform pressed and clean, his posture suggesting competence rather than subservience. Werner had never seen anyone like him in a position of responsibility. German propaganda depicted such people as primitive, inferior, fit only for labor. Yet here was this man, trusted with duties, respected by his white comrades. The soldier stopped in front of Werner. "You look cold, kid," he said in English. Werner understood the tone, if not the words. The soldier handed him a blanket, thick wool that smelled of soap. "Thank you," Werner managed in broken English. His teachers in Hamburg would have been horrified. The soldier nodded and moved on. Werner wrapped the blanket around his shoulders. It was warmer than anything he had owned in months. Brenner watched this exchange with undisguised contempt. "You thank them now," he said. "Remember that when they show their true nature." But hours passed, and the true nature Brenner promised never appeared. No beatings, no interrogations, no torture, just processing, paperwork, and more food than Werner could finish. That night, prisoners were assigned to barracks. Real beds with real mattresses. Clean sheets. Werner lay in the darkness, his stomach full for the first time since before the invasion, and tried to understand what was happening. He heard Brenner's voice from across the room, low and intense, organizing older prisoners for some unspoken purpose. Maintaining discipline, staying true, preparing for the day Germany would triumph, and they would be freed. Werner pulled his blanket tighter. Outside, American guards chatted and laughed. Their voices carried no hatred. They sounded like the boys from Werner's old neighborhood, the ones who played football in the streets before the war, turned everything gray. Sleep would not come. Werner stared at the ceiling and asked himself a question that felt like treason. What else did they lie about? He had no answer. But the question alone changed everything. America unfolded beyond the window like a dream that refused to end. Werner pressed his forehead against the glass as the military train pushed westward through Pennsylvania. He had expected destruction. He had expected the evidence of German might that propaganda films promised: bombed factories, starving refugees, cities reduced to ash. Instead, he saw farmland stretching to horizons he could not reach. Red barns standing proud against green hills. Cattle grazing in pastures so lush they seemed painted. Not a single crater, not a single ruin. The Reich had promised that America was crumbling. The Reich had lied. 2 days on the train now. 2 days of watching this impossible country scroll past like a cinema reel. The prisoners sat in converted passenger cars, guards posted at each end, but otherwise free to move about. Some played cards, some slept, some, like Werner, simply watched. Friedrich sat across from him, reading an American newspaper someone had left behind. His English was limited, but he studied the photographs with intensity. "Look at this," he said, holding up a page. "An advertisement for automobiles. New automobiles. They're still making them." Werner took the paper. The advertisement showed a gleaming car with chrome bumpers and white wall tires. A smiling family stood beside it. Father, mother, 2 children, a dog. The price listed seemed astronomical, but the fact that such things existed at all felt like a violation of natural law. In Germany, factories made tanks or nothing. Civilian production had ceased years ago. The train slowed as it approached a small town in Ohio. Werner checked the station sign, Bellefontaine. Population numbers were posted proudly, as though the town had nothing to hide. Through the window, he counted a grocery store, a hardware shop, a movie theater with a bright marquee advertising something called Meet Me in St. Louis. Then he saw the women. They gathered on the platform with baskets and trays, dozens of them in cotton dresses and practical shoes. Gray-haired grandmothers, young mothers with children clinging to their skirts, teenage girls in bobby socks. They carried sandwiches, fruit, bottles of lemonade. Guards opened the train doors. The women approached. Werner's breath caught. These people had lost sons to German bullets, lost brothers in North Africa, in Italy, in the hedgerows of France. German submarines had sunk ships carrying their loved ones into cold Atlantic graves. Yet here they stood, offering food to the enemy. A woman stopped at Werner's window. She was perhaps 60, with silver hair pinned beneath a simple hat. Her hands were weathered from work, her eyes lined from years of prairie sun. She held a basket containing sandwiches wrapped in cloth napkins. "You boys must be hungry," she said. Her voice carried no hatred, no accusation, just the practical concern of someone who saw young men far from home. Werner accepted a sandwich. His hands trembled. "Thank you," he managed. The woman nodded. Then she reached into her pocket and withdrew a photograph. A young man in American uniform smiled at the camera, his eyes bright with the confidence of those who do not know what war truly costs. "My grandson," she said. "Tommy. He was killed at Anzio in February." Werner's blood turned to ice. He wanted to speak, to apologize, to somehow undo the horror that connected them. But words failed. What could he possibly say? The woman looked at the photograph for a long moment. Then she looked at Werner with an expression he would remember for the rest of his life. "You're someone's grandson too," she said. "Someone is praying for you to come home. I know because I prayed for Tommy the same way." She handed him a piece of pie wrapped in paper and moved on to the next window. Werner sat frozen. The sandwich grew warm in his grip. Around him, other prisoners accepted food with similar expressions of bewilderment. Some wept openly. Even hardened veterans struggled to maintain composure. Brenner appeared at Werner's shoulder. His face was dark with fury. "These people are the enemy," he hissed. "Their kindness is a weapon. They want you weak. They want you grateful. A grateful prisoner is a broken prisoner." Werner looked at the pie in his hand. He thought about Tommy, dead at Anzio. He thought about the woman who had lost everything and still found room in her heart to feed the boys who might have killed him. "Maybe," Werner said quietly, "I was already broken." Brenner grabbed his collar. "Remember who you are. Remember your oath. This kindness means nothing. When Germany wins, we will. Germany is not going to win." The words escaped before Werner could stop them. They hung in the air between them. Treasonous and true, Brenner's grip tightened. His eyes burned with something between rage and fear. "You are a coward. You are weak. You dishonor everyone who died for the fatherland." Werner met his gaze. Something had shifted inside him. The woman's face lingered in his mind. Her grief. Her grace. "Maybe I am weak," Werner said, "but I would rather be weak than be what we became." Brenner released him with disgust and stalked away. The train began to move. Werner watched Ohio disappear behind them. The women still waving from the platform. He ate the pie. It tasted like apple and cinnamon, and the end of everything he thought he knew. Kansas stretched to infinity in every direction, and Werner Hoffman had never felt so small. The military truck bounced along a dirt road, carrying its cargo of prisoners toward a cluster of buildings rising from the prairie like a mirage. Guard towers, barbed wire fences, rows of wooden barracks arranged with military precision. But beyond the wire, nothing but grass bending in endless wind beneath a sky so vast it seemed to press down with physical weight. Camp Concordia. Their final destination. Their prison for however long this war lasted. Werner climbed down from the truck on unsteady legs. After the ship, the processing center, and the train, his body had forgotten how to exist without constant motion. The ground felt strange beneath his feet, too solid, too still. The camp commander waited by the main gate. Colonel Harrison was a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and the patient expression of someone who had explained the same things many times before. A German-speaking officer stood beside him, ready to translate. "Gentlemen," Harrison began, and the translator echoed his words. "Welcome to Camp Concordia. You are now prisoners of the United States Army. Your war is over." Werner felt the weight of those words settle into his chest. "Let me be clear about your situation," Harrison continued. "You will not be tortured. You will not be starved. You will not be executed. The Geneva Convention governs your treatment, and this country respects its obligations." He paused to let this register. "Work is available but voluntary. Those who choose to work will be paid 80 cents per day in camp scrip, which can be spent at the canteen. You will receive mail. You will have access to a library, athletic facilities, and religious services. Your job is to survive until peace comes. Our job is to ensure you do." Murmurs rippled through the prisoners. Werner saw confusion on faces that had expected brutality. Brenner stood at the back of the group, his expression unreadable. Processing took hours. Medical checks, paperwork, assignment to barracks. Werner found himself in Building 17 with 30 other prisoners, mostly young men captured in France. The barracks smelled of fresh pine and disinfectant. Each bed had a mattress, 2 blankets, and a pillow. Werner sat on his assigned cot and tried to remember the last time he had slept in a real bed. Months at least, maybe longer. First time in Kansas. Werner looked up. A prisoner around 25 years old stood grinning at him. He He had sun-darkened skin and an easy manner that seemed impossible for someone behind barbed wire. "I am Heinrich," the man said, "captured at El Alamein. 2 years in this place now." He spoke with the casual tone of someone discussing the weather. 2 years, Werner repeated. The number felt impossible. Heinrich sat on the neighboring cot. "It passes faster than you think. I work at a farm nearby. The Hendersons. Their son is fighting in the Pacific, so I help with the harvest." He smiled at Werner's shocked expression. "They feed me dinner every Sunday. Real American dinner. Roast beef, potatoes, apple pie. Mrs. Henderson reminds me of my grandmother." Werner struggled to process this information. "The Americans let you eat with enemy families? We are not enemies to them anymore. We're just boys who got caught up in something bigger than ourselves." Heinrich's expression grew thoughtful. "The Hendersons lost their nephew at Kasserine Pass. German tanks killed him. But when they look at me, they do not see a German tank. They see a kid who misses his mother." From across the barracks, Brenner's voice cut through. Traitor talk. Collaborator poison. He had gathered his usual group of hardliners in the corner. "Men like this one will hang when Germany achieves victory. Mark my words. Heinlichkeit. There is always one, usually more than one. They will learn or they will not. Either way, the war does not care about their loyalty." That evening, Werner walked to the edge of the compound. The sun was setting over Kansas, painting the sky in colors he had no names for. Orange bleeding into purple, bleeding into blue, so deep it felt like falling. The prairie grass swayed in waves that looked like breathing. He pressed his fingers against the fence wire. Cold metal, real boundary. But the boundary felt less like a cage and more like a frame around something he was only beginning to see. "Beautiful, isn't it?" An American guard approached. Young, maybe Werner's age. He had red hair and freckles and an accent Werner could not place. "Yes," Werner said carefully. "Beautiful." The guard leaned against a post and pulled out a pack of cigarettes. He offered one to Werner. A simple gesture, an impossible bridge. Werner hesitated, then accepted. The guard lit both cigarettes with a single match. They stood in silence as the sky darkened. Stars emerged one by one, then by dozens, then by thousands, more than Werner had ever seen through Hamburg's light pollution. "Same stars you see in Germany," the guard said. "My grandfather came from Bavaria. Left in 1890. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if he had stayed." Werner looked at the young American. Different uniform, different language, same age, same confusion about a world that demanded they hate each other for reasons neither of them fully understood. "Maybe," Werner said slowly, "we would have been friends." The guard smiled. It was a sad smile, weighted with everything the war had cost them both. "Maybe we still can be." After. The word hung in the air between them. After. It implied a future neither could predict. It implied survival. It implied hope. Werner watched the stars wheel overhead. Somewhere across the ocean, Germany burned. Somewhere in this vast country, American mothers received telegrams about sons who would not return. The war continued its hungry consumption of youth and dreams. But here, in this small moment, two boys stood together beneath the same sky. Werner took a drag of a cigarette. The smoke rose and disappeared into Kansas darkness. For the first time in longer than he could remember, he did not feel like a prisoner, but he felt like a human being, waiting to see who he would become when the world finally stopped burning.